Online for Authors. I'm chatting with Christine Sadry, author of 13 Years Lost. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you for having me on your program.
I am super excited to have you. I was really interested in your book, but before we dive in, why don't you give my listeners just a quick idea of what they're going to find when they open up the cover?
Well, I was born in Poland. It's a memoir, and so many things happened in my life that at one point I thought I must write it down. And slowly it turned into a book, but it took a lifetime. Well, first, I was born in Poland behind the Iron Curtain. And when I was 5 years old, my mother died and my father had left, and I had three sisters. So we were all separated, and I was with my grandmother on the farm. And my grandmother used to tell me about America, a land that was, that anything was possible. And, when you're a 7, 8-year-old child, you have this imagination. So we would be sitting by the fire, by the stove, and keeping ourselves warm. And I would hear about America. And I knew my mother was gone, passed, and it was just the two of us. My sisters, were living with aunts and uncles. So I would dream about this country. I would think to myself, if I'm behind the Iron Curtain, what is it all out there? What is the best music, the best clothing, whatever you can imagine? And so one day I was walking in my village, and this man was visiting someone. I didn't know, but my family knew him. And he asked me, would you like to come to America? Well, as an 8-year-old who heard about America, I thought it was my destiny. And I was, oh my God. So I ran home to my grandmother and I'm like, have my father sign the papers. I knew enough that something had to be done legally, even that much. So time went by, and when I was 9, they processed the adoption, and my uncle and my sister, they drove me to the train station. My uncle drove me all the way to Warsaw. At 9 years old, they put me alone on the plane, and I arrived at JFK Airport.
Isn't that crazy? That part of the story alone was worth writing a memoir about, because that was really crazy to me. One of the things that I was really curious about was, as an American all my life, and, you hear things about being behind the Iron Curtain. I found it surprising that it was that easy for you to leave. I was under the impression that nobody got to leave unless you snuck out.
Well, this was a legally processed adoption. Okay. So this couple, the man that I met, he had family in Poland. They didn't have any children in America. He had an American-Italian wife. And so it is difficult. There was no other way. The Berlin Wall, where people were trying to escape, they were getting shot. So there was no way of escaping. So for me, when I heard that someone wanted to bring me to America, so they had to process the adoption, file all the papers, get everything signed, and then put me on the plane. So I felt so lucky, here I am getting out of this communist country where there's freedom.
Right.
So I arrived in at JFK, and no one was waiting for me. And I remember thinking, people were coming off the plane and their family were meeting them. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what if nobody shows up? And I was sitting there, the stewardess left. And I'm thinking, am I a failure already? Are they going to set me back? Will I be, you have all these thoughts.
Right.
So finally, like an hour later, he shows up. And, I'm your father. He was a stranger to me, but I was their adopted daughter. And we drive to Philadelphia. This was in Southwest Philadelphia on Gray's Avenue. We would get there late. My grandmother packed gifts and, my documents and clothes and everything. Anyway, I got there late and I was very tired, so I went to bed. Well, the next morning I wake up and everything was gone. Every document, every gift, every piece of paper, everything disappeared. and a chill ran down my back, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what happened?
Yeah.
But
They were trying to erase that part of you.
yes, but you know, at 9 years old, you can't erase anything. You know,
No.
everything is there. And even before I left, I memorized my address in Poland. At 8 years old, I'm like, Helena Moros, wieś Krasne, poczta Krasnopol, powiat Sejny, województwo Białystok. So this huge address for an 8-year-old to remember. I'm like, what if something happens? I have to remember this. So after being there for a little while, he told me, my adoptive father said, you will never contact your family. You are ours. We took you out of dirt, and that's it. And I realized that my life was not going to be a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah.
The next several parts of the book during that period of your life were heart-wrenching for me, because I think, here is this child who you've already had plenty of trauma. Yes. Your mother died when you were young. Your father left. Your family was split completely apart. You had a sister that you loved so dearly who was like a second mother that you didn't hardly get to see anymore, all of these things. And then you think, yay, I'm coming to America, things are looking up. And then it turns out that they weren't looking up for you at all.
Exactly.
And that was heart-wrenching for me.
It was a nightmare. I mean, for the next 5 years, I wasn't even allowed to cry out loud. So I would wait till they go to bed, put covers over my head, and cry for years. The loneliness, I had no friends, I had no no one, and even though I was going to, I did well in school, but by the time I got to high school, which was West Catholic Girls High School, at 15, they told me they weren't going to pay for my school anymore. So I'm like, oh my God, I had to find some work because I wanted to stay there. Right. So I found a little job like modeling and handing out American Express applications to at least pay for my tuition. And then when girls were getting ready to go to college, I knew if they didn't pay for my high school, they were not going to pay for college.
Exactly.
So I took courses that allowed me to work half day, short typing, shorthand, bookkeeping, all these things. And so I was working part-time, so I was able to put myself through high school.
Yeah.
And I did so well that in the end, the Social Security Administration sent me an invite for an appointment for an interview.
Right.
So I got the job at Social Security Administration, and I was feeling more secure. So I wrote to my family in Poland. I was 18. I was legal. I was waiting because they couldn't do anything to me by then. And I write to my family. I put all their names, send it out. And later I found out that one of the girls, my sister had the same name that one of the girls in her class had, and her father was a postman. So they pretended to be my family, tried to get money.
Yeah. And when I read that part, it was like, oh no. I mean, it was like one thing after another.
No breaks.
Absolutely. One of the things that I found very refreshing about your memoir is that you highlight both the good and the bad, not just in things that happened to you, but in your own decision making. Like, you weren't afraid to say, I did this and maybe that wasn't the best thing, or, I made mistakes and these are the things that happened to me. What made you decide to go ahead and be vulnerable that way? For instance, I'm thinking about like your relationship with your daughter, which was both good and had a lot of strife that went with it. And there were a lot of things I'm sure people could say, well, Christine could have done differently, Like, I'm sure, right? Right. So with that, what made you decide to open up and be vulnerable and put out there what happened versus trying to like gloss over that? Like, you could have left that part out completely and no one would have ever known.
One, I think that other women have experienced these situations,
Right.
And also, if you're going to write a memoir, you need to write the truth and what has happened. Right. If you're going to gloss over things, don't write it. So even though I knew I would be judged,
Yeah.
I thought, there are other women that are going through this, and it's not always the good choice, or it's the best
The
that
best choice you could make.
you
Right.
can make. Because I knew if my daughter stayed with me, and I had no mother ever, I had no father, I had these people that were
They
beating
were
me.
horrible. Yeah. Yeah.
What could I offer? I needed to work. I couldn't stay home with my daughter. I had to work. Not only that, but when my family found me, I lost my mind. So I was not in a position. She would have been, she would have had more issues,
More trauma.
more
Yeah.
trauma that I would give her, because I wasn't the right person. I couldn't give her this steady life. But her father, even though he lacked ambition, he was a good man. He had a good heart. And she listened to him. To me, she said to me, well, you don't look like a mother. I'm not going to listen to you.
Right.
What am I going to do?
Right.
And also, like, sometimes mother daughter have competition. So whatever I would say, she would do the opposite. So I'm like,
and then you were working, which meant you weren't home to enforce whatever it was that you said. Right.
Yeah, she was a latchkey, a
latchkey kid. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, what could I do? So to me, even though I wish I could have done better, it was the best thing for her. It was very sad for me. I cried, making that decision. I missed her so much, but I had to do what I had to do,
Right.
and women do come to these positions where they have to make, not always the best choice, but the choice that is necessary at that time.
I think that that's something that, as I've grown older, I've really come to realize. And I look back on mistakes I made with my own children and in my own life. And I think, I did the best I could do at the time,
Yes.
given the tools that I had.
And the circumstances
that I was in, given the mindset that I had at the moment, wherever my mental health was, and all of those other things that you really, I think most people, not all people, there are some people that are just wicked horrible, but most people are really doing the best they can.
Yes.
They're doing the best. It may not look good to someone who's in a different place in their life, but it's really the best, because if they could do better, they'd be doing better.
Exactly. If I could have done any better, if I could have stayed home, if I had a grandma, if I had anyone to help me, I would have done better decisions. I had no one.
Right.
I had no one to go to. It was just me and the world and America, you know?
Right. So let's kind of fast forward a little bit. You worked in the Social Security Administration for a while, then you started working with the UN.
Yes.
And I was fascinated by that, because there is a lot of world history that, even with I had a good education. I took, world lit and world history classes and all kinds of things. There's things I don't know. And there is a lot of what I consider more modern history, from like the 1950s forward, that we didn't get at all in school. I mean, like, I didn't know things. And so there were these things that you were involved in that were happening during my lifetime that I'm ignorant of. And I was just fascinated how you were so involved. So, like, my big question here is, like, what do you think was the most exciting thing that you did with the UN? Like, the thing that was just like, wow.
I was working on a lot of international conferences in the beginning when I first joined the United Nations, but I've always wanted to work in the field. And I heard, like, a friend of mine that I work with, Shirley Tom, she was British, and she used to talk to me about Africa. And I remember thinking, oh my God, you have visions of what Africa might be.
Right?
Yes, but there's no way you can imagine. You don't see it on TV, you don't see many movies. And so I was fascinated, and this is like where the humans came from, that the part of Southern Africa. So when I had the opportunity, I heard that they were looking for electro observers to go to Angola, and one girl at the lunch table, she's like, "Oh, I've received a call, blah blah blah, and I cannot go." And I'm like, "Oh, Mr. Shu needs people to go to as an electro observer to Angola."
It's like, me.
So I ran back to the office. I found his name. I called him up. I said, "Hello, Mr. Shu. This is Christine Sadry. I hear you're looking for people to go to Angola. Well, I'm very interested. Can I meet you tomorrow at 4:00?" And I went there, and he said, "Okay, we spoke and everything." I said, "Well, I just need to get releases because I needed to get it from the chief, the deputy chief, the director, the personnel director." I mean, there were so many layers. And they started out wanting me to go there for 2 weeks. I got the release. Then they said, "Oh, no, we want you there for 2 months."
So you had to start all over again.
I had to start all over again.
Right.
But I loved it. I got the one-way ticket to Luanda, Angola, the capital. And, in the UN, it's like, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. And then you get there and you wait. So I was like, okay. So I get there. They put me in a little container, 8x10, to wait for my assignment. And in the meantime, so I wanted to see a little bit of Angola. So I met this civilian police officer from Netherlands. And he's like, "Well, they're going to have a supply flight in a day or two. Why don't, I'll talk to people. Once you get yourself with a manifest sheet, we'll connect. You can get." And so 2 days later, I show up at 5, 6 in the morning. I'm not on the manifest sheet, but they're going to put me on. And I got myself on a Russian supply plane, an Antonov, going to all the regions. You're sitting on this metal seat with the noise and everything. And I went to Dondo, Luena, Surimo. I loved it. And then later they assigned me to Surimo, and we had to check out the polling station. And basically in 92, there was no GPS. There was no really map.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. So I was with this other colleague, this other lady. She also was working with us. We met up. So we would have this car, and she spoke Portuguese. So that was great because they speak Portuguese in Angola. And it would be like, go to the anthill and take a left. Once you pass the banana tree, you take a right and go 4 kilometers. So we did all the mileage, and we mapped out. We did that for 20 days. And then during elections, I had a team, a Swedish military observer, and a captain Spanish captain, but he spoke Portuguese as the translator. And we did a quick count in the polling station. Oh, also one day when I came back from Surimo to go back to Luanda, the capital, I wanted to call my daughter because back then there was no email, nothing.
Right.
So you had to pay $7 a minute, and we all stood in line to get this one telephone. And afterwards, we were like, let's go out for dinner to Barracuda. That's the name of the restaurant on the beach. And so it was 2 New Zealanders, military guys. And I maybe it was like 4 or 5 of us. And they decide, well, it would be like an hour, but if we take a shortcut, we'll get there in 20 minutes. So we're like, sure, take the shortcut. So the guy takes the shortcut. We go around the bend, and there's a guy in fatigues with an AK-47 pointed at us. And he's like, come, So we're like, oh my God. So thank God they were smart. He's like, look, we have a better chance to stay alive if we stay together. Nobody panics. And what I will do is we just smile, be polite, and just follow my instructions. So we're like, okay. So, what are you going to do? There's a guy with a gun. So he pulls up, nudges him to pull the window down, puts a gun to his head, and tells us to get out. And we're like, we're smiling, going, no, United Nations, no. And this went on for a few minutes. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to put the foot on the gas slowly, and you smile and wave. And when I tell you to hit the ground, I'm going to hit the gas, and we're going to run away. And that's what we did.
Oh my gosh. See, yeah. And I remember that in the book thinking, because that's really scary.
Yeah.
I mean,
it felt like a movie because you can't believe it. I mean, thank God nobody got shot at that time, but it's like, you can't believe it's happening.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I just think that's crazy. So you're now living in Florida. You're no
Yes.
longer with the UN. You're doing the retired thing. I'm curious, do you still long for that kind of adventure?
Yes. I mean, when I took early retirement because my husband is older, so I wanted to
Yeah,
spend time with him. But I really miss that life because not only, first of all, when you're with a group from the UN, you become like a community.
right.
And my husband he always had happy hours. So he always got people together. And we always, it had camaraderie. And you're experiencing something new. You're doing elections. You're like, I was in charge of board and inquiry investigations. I had to come up with a data system and how to do the reports, hire people, go to investigate something. And also you're in the middle of the Congo or Sierra
Right.
Leone.
Right.
I loved it. I mean, we all take chances. The way I looked at it, I was working at the Daily News building in Manhattan. People crossing 42nd Street got killed.
Right. Exactly.
When did you
People say things to me sometimes like that, like, oh, I would never do that because, it's dangerous. And I think, well, so is driving a car out on the highway, but we do it every day.
Exactly. If it's
Right.
your time to go, you're going to go.
Yeah.
I mean, don't take very,
Well,
don't
don't play in the street. I tell people,
Yes.
like, don't play in the street with oncoming traffic. But on the
Yes.
other hand, you can't sit at home in a bubble.
Yeah, and wonder, oh my God, if I go anywhere, something's going to happen. So I never had that fear. I figured if people crossing the street die, I mean, if it's your time, you're
Right.
going to go.
Right. Well, and if I often say that if I die doing something I wanted to be doing, that's
It's the
far
best way.
better. It's far better than to die having been home wishing you had done something.
Yeah, or waiting,
Or waiting to do
in
something,
fear.
right?
Yeah.
So given that you don't have the opportunity with the UN anymore, do you do anything adventurous now, or have you kind of settled into your retirement?
Well, at the moment, writing the book, which is a lifesaver,
Right.
because my husband passed,
I'm sorry to
recently.
hear that. My husband passed recently as well,
Oh.
so I felt that for you.
So, my heart is broken and
Yeah.
longing. But thank God I have this, because
Yeah.
this allows me to do something now, something creative, to focus on something, and see where it will lead. I actually won 4 awards. I don't know if I mentioned.
Fantastic. That's great. That's
Literary
great.
Titan, American Writing, Indies Book Award, and the Independent Publishers Book Award.
Fantastic.
So, I mean, I'm so blessed. I just, and this allows me, I'm going to be at Barnes and Noble this weekend and doing some speaking engagements. So yeah, I thank you, God.
I know. Well, it's interesting. My husband passed away in January, and
oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
And he and I took this great adventure where we rode across the United States on a tandem bicycle. So we rode from the coast of Oregon to Washington, D.C. on a tandem. And I had written a book about things that I learned along the way about life. And the book came out 1 month after he passed. And it has been, for like you, an amazing way for me to have good memories of him.
Yeah.
And to focus on something other than the sadness and the longing and the grief that a person goes through when they lose someone they love. So yeah, I understand that completely. I think that's been wonderful.
Yes, absolutely a blessing.
When someone reads your book, other than just, getting this great story, this cool thing that Christine did in her life, etc., what do you want them to get from it? What do you hope they walk away understanding?
I want women or anyone to get that no matter where you come from, or what hand you've been dealt with. I mean, I had no family. I didn't speak the language. The people were abusive. They told me I had the value of a chair. No matter where you come from, as long as you stay focused, education is very important. You can rise above and you can make an amazing life.
Yeah.
Don't lose yourself, and let all those bad things, let them go. I remember when I left those people, the main thing I thought to myself was, let them go. Don't hold on to the hate or the bitterness or anger or whatever. Just this was one moment in my life. Of course, the scars are still there,
Right. It doesn't erase that, but if you're not holding on to the anger, then it can't keep controlling you.
Exactly. And this
Yeah.
way, your future is your own. It's not, your past is not holding you back from making great decisions, focusing on your life, focusing on you, and choosing a wonderful life with thought and knowing what you don't want and how you want to move forward.
I love that. Absolutely love that, Christine. So now that you've got the writing bug and you've done this memoir, do you have plans to write anything else?
At the moment, no. At the moment, I just want to promote the book.
Right?
But I think, depending on where it goes and what other things will come up in my life, and maybe there's something I want to also share with other people, then I might. I mean, there's always something working there.
Absolutely. I know. It's funny. A lot of people are like, no, it was going to be my only book. And then once I got it out, I thought, well, I do have another idea.
Yeah. So
there's something about writing that's like, it's almost, it becomes addictive. It's like, ooh, I have other things I can say. So absolutely. So, hey guys, if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. And there you're going to have an opportunity to win a copy of 13 Years Lost. Find the post. Tell me something that you liked or loved about this podcast or learned. And you will have an opportunity to win a free copy. So, Christine, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, talk with you about your book, talk with you about your experiences, book you for something, to talk to a group of people, how do they reach out to you?
I have a website, christinesadry.com.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also on Facebook, Christine
Super.
Sadry. I'm on Instagram, Christine Sadry, and LinkedIn. So anyway, you can reach me.
Super. And I'll have all those links in my show notes, guys, so you could reach right out to her. Go ahead and grab yourself a copy of 13 Years Lost. If you do, and you like this
it's on
book,
Amazon.
Yes, on Amazon. Make sure that you review it as well, because as authors, having the reviews are amazing.
Yes.
So, Christine, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, Terry, thank you so much for having me. I thank you for letting me talk about my story, my life, and my book. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.